to humiliate her. Then everyone looked at the billionaire. The Whitmore estate sat on 40 acres of manicured land in the hills outside San Francisco, the kind of place that made ordinary people slow their cars down just to look through the iron gates. There were fountains that ran clear even in the dry season, rose gardens trimmed by hand every Tuesday morning, and a main house with 12 bedrooms and a grand staircase that curved like a swan's neck. To the outside world, it was a symbol of everything money could build. But to the people who lived and worked inside those gates, it was something else entirely. A world with its own rules, its own silences, and its own cruelties. Elena Vasquez had been working in that house for 3 years. She was 26 years old, with dark hair she kept pinned back tightly, and hands that were always slightly rough from cleaning solution and dish soap. She had come from a small town in Texas after her husband left, after the bills piled up, after the choices narrowed down to almost nothing. She had taken the job not because she loved cleaning other people's floors, but because it came with something rare and precious. A small room in the staff quarters, large enough for a twin bed, a dresser, and a crib. Because the job had let her bring her daughter. Lily was 3 years old and had her mother's dark eyes and her absent father's stubborn chin. She was tiny for her age, still round-cheeked and wobbly in the way that toddlers are, like the world was slightly too big for her feet to grip properly. Every morning, Elena would wake before dawn, dress Lily in soft clothes, and carry her down the hallway to the small play corner that had been set up near the laundry room, a space Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, had quietly allowed. And every morning, Lily would toddle around that corner with her stuffed rabbit named Blue, humming sounds that weren't quite words yet but carried all the warmth of songs. It was in that corner 3 months ago that it had happened. The Whitmore estate had a music room on the 2nd floor, a room that smelled like old wood and polish and ambition. In the center of it sat a Steinway grand piano, black and gleaming, worth more than Elena would earn in 10 years of work. The room was used mostly for show, for the parties Mr. Whitmore threw when business called for spectacle. But Lily had wandered in one afternoon while Elena was cleaning the adjacent hallway, and before Elena could catch her, the little girl had climbed up onto the piano bench, reached out her tiny hands, and pressed 3 keys. The sound that came out was soft and wondering, like the piano itself was surprised to be touched so gently. Lily pressed the keys again, and then again. Not randomly, there was a pattern to it, slow and searching, the way a child sounds out letters before they can read words. She pressed a low note, then a higher one, then one in the middle, and cocked her head at the result like a tiny scientist testing a theory. Elena had stood in the doorway with her heart in her throat, waiting for someone to come and scold them both. But no one came. And so she watched her daughter sit at that massive instrument and play, if you could call it playing, with an expression of total concentration that seemed too old for her 3-year-old face. Marcus Whitmore had found them 10 minutes later. He was 38 years old, and everything about him was precise. His posture, his haircut, his dark eyes that had the quality of always measuring something. He had built his technology company from nothing, which was either a story of inspiration or ruthlessness depending on who was telling it. People in his industry both admired and feared him. His employees respected him but kept a careful distance. He was not unkind exactly. He was just contained like a very expensive watch, all the complicated machinery kept neatly inside. He had stood in the doorway of the music room and watched Lily play for a long moment without saying a word. Elena had rushed forward immediately, reaching for her daughter, apologies already tumbling out of her mouth. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore," she wandered in before I could stop her. "I'll take her out right now, it won't happen again." "Don't," he said. Just that one word, quietly. Elena froze. Marcus walked slowly into the room and stood a few feet from the piano, watching Lily. The little girl hadn't even noticed him. She was pressing a sequence of notes now, the same 4 notes in a row, over and over, adjusting slightly each time like she was tuning something inside herself. "How long has she been doing this?" he asked. "Just today," Elena said carefully. We've never had a piano. She's just curious. Children are curious about everything. She's not just curious, Marcus said. His voice was flat and certain, the way he said most things, like he was reporting facts. She's listening. There's a difference. Elena didn't know what to say to that. She was watching him watch her daughter, and something about the quality of his attention, still and serious and genuinely interested, made her feel something shift inside her chest. Most people looked at Lily the way they looked at all small children, briefly with a surface-level smile, and then away. Marcus Whitmore was looking at her daughter like she was something worth really seeing. He had left without saying anything else that day. But the next morning, Elena found a note slipped under the door of the staff quarters. It was brief and typed on plain paper in the way that very busy people write things. No ceremony, just information. The music room is available on weekday mornings from 9 to 11. If Lily wishes to use the piano during those hours, that is permitted. M.W. Elena had read that note 4 times. Then she had folded it carefully and put it in the small wooden box where she kept the few things that mattered most to her. Lily's hospital bracelet from the day she was born, a photograph of her own mother, and now this. She hadn't yet known that a woman named Cassandra Vale would arrive at the estate 6 weeks later with a diamond ring on her finger, and a smile that only reached her eyes when something useful was in front of her. She hadn't yet known what was coming, but she had kept the note. And somehow, without knowing why, that felt important. Cassandra Vale was the kind of beautiful that required maintenance. She spent 2 hours every morning on her appearance, and the result was impeccable. Honey blonde hair always in perfect soft waves, clothes that were expensive without looking like they were trying, a practiced laugh that was warm enough to feel genuine but musical enough to be remembered. She was 28 years old and had grown up in a family with old money that was quietly running out, which had given her both the manners of wealth and the desperation of someone watching a clock tick down. She had met Marcus Whitmore at a charity gala 8 months ago. She had positioned herself near him deliberately and then pretended not to notice him, which was a strategy she had refined over years. Marcus, who was used to being pursued directly, had found the indifference interesting. They had dated for 6 months, and Cassandra had been thoughtful and strategic about every step, careful not to push too hard, careful to be exactly what she calculated he needed. Composed, intelligent, low drama. The engagement had been announced quietly. Marcus was not a man for spectacle in his personal life, which suited Cassandra fine. She did not need the world to see the ring. She needed what the ring represented: access, security, and a permanent address behind those iron gates. She had moved into the estate 2 weeks after the engagement, into the master suite that was larger than most apartments. And from the first day, she had begun the quiet work of assessing everything around her: the staff, the schedules, the social calendar, and most importantly, the small invisible hierarchies of the household that told her what she could and could not control. Elena Vasquez she had noticed immediately. It wasn't anything Elena did wrong. Elena was, in fact, one of the best employees on the staff. Quiet, thorough, never late, never complained. Mrs. Patterson trusted her completely, and that was part of it. But it was more than competence that made Cassandra notice her. It was the note. Cassandra had found out about it 3 days after arriving, when she'd overheard Marcus mention offhandedly to Mrs. Patterson that the child in the staff quarters should be welcome in the music room whenever she wants. The casualness of it, the ease with which he had extended that particular kindness, had lodged in Cassandra's chest like a splinter. She had watched Elena after that. Watched the way Marcus sometimes paused in a hallway when Lily was nearby, crouching down to the toddler's level with a patience he didn't show most adults. Watched the way a flicker of something, not quite a smile but the cousin of one, crossed his face when Lily said something with that solemn toddler seriousness. Watched the way Elena would look at him in those moments with an expression she quickly covered, like someone closing a curtain. Cassandra was not stupid. She was, in her way, very perceptive. And what she perceived made the splinter work deeper. She began small. She suggested to Mrs. Patterson that the staff quarters play corner was cluttering the service area, and had it moved to a more inconvenient corner near the utility room. She scheduled dinner parties on mornings when Elena's piano room access hours fell, so that Elena was needed elsewhere. She made requests of Elena specifically and directly. Little extras that weren't in anyone's job description, delivered with a pleasant smile that made them impossible to refuse without seeming difficult. Elena did all of it without complaint. She was not naive. She understood exactly what was happening. She had seen this pattern before in other houses, other employers. She kept her head down, did her work, held Lily a little tighter at night, and reminded herself what the alternative looked like. She could not afford to lose this job. She could not afford to lose the room. And then came the dinner party. It was a Saturday evening in late April. Marcus had invited 12 guests. Tech investors, a few old friends, a journalist who wrote profiles of people like him. Cassandra had planned the evening with the thoroughness of a military operation. The menu, the table settings, the seating chart, the after-dinner entertainment, which was to be a string quartet hired for the occasion. But the string quartet had cancelled that afternoon. Car trouble, they said. Genuine emergency, probably. Cassandra had spent an hour on the phone trying to replace them and come up empty. She had been standing in the music room, furious and calculating, when Lily had wandered past the open door. The little girl had stopped in the doorway the way she always did, drawn by the piano the way flowers turn toward light. She was holding Blue the stuffed rabbit against her chest and looking at the Steinway with that specific expression, quiet and serious and wanting. Cassandra had looked at Lily. And then she had looked at the piano. And then she had smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes. She had walked to the doorway and crouched down, using her most warm and musical voice, the one that made people feel like they were being seen. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "Do you want to play the piano tonight? In front of everyone?" Lily looked up at her with those dark, serious eyes and said nothing. She was 3. She didn't understand negotiations. "I think you should," Cassandra said pleasantly. "I think everyone would love to see you play." The plan had formed fully in her mind within 30 seconds. She would present the child at dinner as a charming improvisation. "Oh, our little musical discovery, isn't it adorable?" And the guests would watch a 3-year-old bang uncertainly on a piano, and they would politely pretend to be charmed, and Elena would be somewhere in the room, understanding perfectly what this was, and Cassandra would watch her understand it, and that would be enough. That would be the point. What she had not calculated for, what she had made the significant mistake of forgetting, was Marcus. She had forgotten to ask herself why he had written that note. The dinner table that evening was set like a photograph. Crystal glasses catching the candlelight, white roses in low arrangements so guests could see each other's faces, everything placed with a centimeter precision that Cassandra demanded. 12 people settled into their chairs with the comfortable ease of people who were used to evenings like this. Conversations moving easily between business and gossip, and the kind of opinions that only come out after the second glass of wine. Elena served quietly, as she always did. She had learned in this work to move through spaces as though she occupied less of them than she did, to be present without being seen, to anticipate without being asked, to carry things without appearing to carry anything. She had dressed Lily in her soft blue pajamas after bath time and settled her in the staff quarters with a small stack of board books and the portable baby monitor. She had told herself it was a normal evening. Then Cassandra had risen from her seat mid-dinner with the practiced grace of a woman who knew how to command a room and said, "I have a little surprise for everyone." Elena had been standing near the sideboard when she heard it. "A turn." Cassandra smiled at the table. "We were going to have a string quartet this evening, but fate had other plans. However," she paused for effect, "I've discovered we have our own little musician right here in this house. A real prodigy in the making." She had looked directly at Elena when she said it. And Elena understood in that instant. with the total clarity of someone who has been navigating small cruelties long enough to recognize them quickly. Exactly what was happening. One of the guests, a woman in a green dress, said, "Oh, how delightful! Who is it?" "Elena," Cassandra said warmly. "Would you bring Lily in?" There was a particular skill in the way she did it. Framing it as an invitation, saying it in front of 12 guests so that refusal would seem like the strange choice, using that pleasant voice that made everything sound like it was being done out of love. Elena stood very still for 2 seconds. She felt her face do the thing it did when she needed it to show nothing. Then she went and got Lily. She carried her daughter into the dining room on her hip, Lily's dark hair sleep-soft against her cheek, Blue the rabbit tucked under one small arm. The guests turned and made the sounds adults make at small children. Warm and involuntary, the sounds that children provoke regardless of context. Lily looked at all the faces with the calm assessment of a toddler who has not yet learned to be self-conscious. "Go on," Cassandra said, gesturing to the music room through the open double doors, her voice carrying that careful brightness. "Go play for everyone, sweetheart." Elena set Lily down. What else could she do? She stood close enough to catch her if she stumbled, and watched her daughter walk toward the piano with that slightly unsteady toddler gait, still clutching Blue. Lily climbed onto the bench the way she always did, with immense seriousness and a lot of effort, one leg hooked up first, then the other. She settled herself. She set Blue carefully on the left side of the bench, in exactly the spot she always set him. She looked at the keys. The dining room had gone quiet. 12 guests with their wine glasses and their comfortable evening were watching a 3-year-old sit at a Steinway grand piano. A few of them had the politely prepared expressions of people bracing for something adorable and discordant. One man had his phone out. Cassandra watched Elena's face. Elena watched her daughter's hands. Lily placed them on the keys. She sat very still for a moment, that stillness that Elena had come to recognize over months of watching, the gathering stillness, the listening. Like she was waiting for the music to tell her it was ready. And then she played. Not banging. Not the random percussion of a child hitting keys. She played the sequence she had been developing over 3 months of weekday mornings in that room. A slow, simple melody that moved up and down the scale with a logic that was entirely her own, that had a beginning and an answer to the beginning, that breathed the way a song breathes. The dining room went very still. Lily played the melody through once, her small face concentrated, her feet not reaching the floor. Then she played it again, and this time she added something. A lower note in the left hand that she hit on certain beats, a discovered harmony, uncertain but there. The guests were no longer holding their prepared expressions. They were just listening. The woman in the green dress had put down her wine glass. Lily played for perhaps 4 minutes. She finished the way she always finished, with those same 3 notes she had played that very first day, the ones that had brought Marcus to the doorway, like a signature she had invented without knowing it. Then she sat quietly, her hands in her lap, looking at the piano. The silence lasted 3 full seconds, and then the room started crying. Not all of them, but the woman in the green dress. Her eyes were bright and she was pressing one hand to her mouth. The older man beside her was looking at the table with the particular expression of someone fighting to keep their face neutral and losing. Even the journalist, who made a career of maintaining professional distance, had set down his pen. Elena was crying. She hadn't meant to. She had meant to hold it in. She was working. She was in a room full of her employer's guests. She was supposed to be invisible. But the tears came quietly and she couldn't stop them. And she didn't bother to wipe them because that would have meant moving her hands and she didn't want to move. She was looking at her 3-year-old daughter on that enormous bench and thinking about the room in Texas, about the bills, about the day she had packed everything into a second-hand car and driven west with a 1-year-old sleeping in the car seat and no certainty about anything at all. Cassandra was not crying. Cassandra was looking at the room with an expression that had frozen somewhere between the smile she had planned and something else. Something that looked, for the first time all evening, like a crack. because the room had not reacted the way she had planned. Not even close. And then everyone looked at Marcus. Marcus Whitmore had been sitting at the head of the table for the entire performance without moving. He had the stillness he always had. Controlled, contained, unreadable. But the people who knew him best, and there was only one at this table, his oldest friend David, sitting 3 seats to his left, knew that this stillness was different. This was not the stillness of a man being patient. This was the stillness of a man being wrecked very quietly, very privately, and keeping it behind his face with everything he had. David watched him and said nothing. He had known Marcus since they were 22 years old, building things in a one-room office in Oakland. He knew what Marcus looked like when something cost him. When Lily finished, Marcus looked at the piano for one long moment. Then he stood up from his chair. The room's attention shifted to him the way rooms always did. Marcus Whitmore was the kind of man that space is oriented around, the way a compass needle finds north. He walked through the double doors into the music room and crouched down in front of the piano bench, so that he was at Lily's level. Lily looked at him with her dark, serious eyes. "That was yours?" he asked her. His voice was very quiet, just for her. Lily considered this. She nodded once, solemnly. "You made that up yourself. Over the mornings?" Another nod. She held Blue a little tighter. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. He was doing the thing he always did with emotions, compressing them into something small enough to manage. He reached out and very gently, with one finger, tapped the 3-note signature she always ended with. He played them correctly, exactly as she had. Lily's eyes went wide. She looked at the keys, then at him. He nodded at the piano. She played them back. He played them again, adding 1 note before them this time. She played what he had played, perfectly. The room behind them was completely silent. Marcus stood up. He picked Lily up from the bench, the gesture natural and unself-conscious, the way you pick up a child you have held before, and turned to face the room with her on his hip, Blue dangling from her arm. He looked at Elena, who was standing against the wall with her arms crossed over herself and tears on her face, and his expression did something that David would later tell his wife was the most human he had seen Marcus look in a decade. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. "Your daughter," he said, "has been teaching herself music for 3 months in a room in my house, with no instruction, no sheet music, and no one telling her it was worth doing. She made something real." He paused. "I want her to have real lessons. Piano, whatever else she wants. I want to find her the right teacher. And I want to cover everything." Another pause, shorter. "Not as an employer. As someone who watched it happen and knows what it means." Elena uncrossed her arms. She pressed one hand over her mouth. She nodded because there were no words. Lily, who understood very little of this except that the room was full of a feeling she had no name for, leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder and looked at the ceiling with her serious eyes. Then Marcus turned to Cassandra. The table full of guests went very, very still. Cassandra had composed herself. She was wearing the smile again, the warm one, the one that performed. "Isn't she wonderful?" she said, in the tone of someone who had meant all of this. Marcus looked at her for a long time. Not with anger. Anger would have been easier to receive. He looked at her with the expression of a man doing an accounting of something and arriving at a number he should have calculated sooner. "I know what tonight was," he said, quietly. Just for her, really, although the table heard it. "And I think you should too." Cassandra's smile remained in place but lost something behind the eyes. The way a light changes when a cloud passes over the sun without the sun going anywhere. Marcus set Lily down gently and turned to his guests. "I'm sorry to interrupt the evening," he said in his normal voice, the business voice, as though he were redirecting a meeting. "Elena, please take Lily to bed. She's 3 years old and she's done enough for one night." There was a sound from the table. Not quite a laugh, not quite a release of breath, somewhere between the two. And then conversation resumed and wine glasses were lifted again. But something had shifted. Permanently and visibly. David, pouring himself a small measure of scotch at the sideboard later, looked at Marcus with the steady eyes of a man who had been waiting a long time to say something and had decided tonight was the night. "You know what you need to do," he said. Marcus picked up his own glass. "I'm working on knowing it," he said. That was all. But David understood. And Marcus understood. And somewhere in the quiet of the staff quarters, Elena was laying her daughter down in her crib and pulling the blanket up over her small shoulders and staying crouched beside the crib for a long time after Lily's eyes had closed. Just staying, just being close, thinking about the feeling of being seen. 6 weeks after the dinner party, Cassandra Vale moved out of the Whitmore estate. It did not happen loudly. There was no dramatic confrontation, no scene in the entrance hall, no broken things. It happened the way things end when one person finally sees clearly what they have been looking at all along. Marcus had a conversation with her in the study on a Sunday morning that lasted 45 minutes. And when it was over, Cassandra packed her things with the dignified efficiency of a woman who had planned for contingencies. She left the ring on the dresser. She did not look back from the car. The household felt the change the way houses do. In a different quality of air, a loosening, the way a room feels after you open a window that's been closed too long. Elena heard about the departure from Mrs. Patterson, who told her in the brief, factual way that Mrs. Patterson communicated most things. Elena said nothing in response. She thanked Mrs. Patterson and went back to her work and did not allow herself to feel anything specific about it, because she was careful that way, because she had learned to be careful that way. The piano lessons began 2 weeks later. Her name was Sophia Chen. Mid-40s, former concert pianist. Now the kind of teacher who had decided that finding the people music lived inside was more important than performing it herself. She drove up to the estate on a Wednesday morning, met Lily in the music room, and sat beside her on the bench for an hour and a half without teaching her a single formal thing. Just listened. Just watched Lily's hands. Nodded occasionally like someone confirming a suspicion. Afterward she had stood in the hallway with Marcus and said, in the flat certain tone of someone who did not deal in exaggeration, "The hearing is extraordinary. She's building internal structure that kids usually don't develop until much later. I don't know how she got here. But she's here." I'll come every week. Lily, who had been listening from inside the music room, played her 3-note signature once, clearly from the bench. Sophia smiled at the door and said, "Yes, I heard you." Elena cried in the laundry room about it for approximately 4 minutes and then washed her face and went back to work. The thing that changed between Elena and Marcus was not sudden. It was not dramatic. It was the accumulation of small things, the kind of things that build meaning the way water shapes stone, slowly, quietly, over time. And then you look and the shape is different and you understand it must have always been going this direction. It was the way he knocked on the door of the staff quarters one evening with a children's book about music that he had ordered and said, "I thought she might like this," and left before Elena could form a complete sentence. It was the way he stopped in hallways where Lily was now without anything to say. Just pausing, just nearby. It was the morning he came into the music room during a lesson and stood in the doorway listening, and Elena, sitting in the chair in the corner the way she always sat during lessons, looked up and found him already looking at her, and neither of them looked away for a second longer than was explicable. It was the Sunday afternoon he had found Elena in the garden, on her day off, sitting on the stone bench near the rose garden with a book she wasn't really reading, and he had sat down on the other end of the bench with the manner of someone who had walked somewhere deliberately and was trying to appear like they hadn't. They had talked for 2 hours. About her town in Texas, about his first office in Oakland, about the specific texture of building something when you have no safety net, about what it costs and what it teaches you. About Lily, about what it was like to watch your child become themselves in front of you. Elena had said, "She's teaching me as much as I'm teaching her," and Marcus had been quiet for a moment and then said, "That's what the best people do," and something in the way he said it made it about more than Lily. When Elena stood up to go back inside, Marcus had stood too, and he had said, in the straightforward way he said everything, "I know the situation is complicated. I know there's a lot of space between where we are and where." He had stopped. started again. I just want you to know that I see you. Not as an employee. As a person. As someone I respect. As someone I think about. Elena had looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said softly. I think about that note you left. He looked slightly off balance then. Just briefly, just a flash. And she realized with a feeling like warmth spreading from the center of her chest outward that she had just seen Marcus Whitmore be genuinely surprised. She didn't say anything else. She went inside. But she was smiling and she didn't stop for a long time. That was in June. By September, Elena was no longer a member of the household staff, though she still lived on the estate. She had begun taking online courses in early childhood music education, paid for quietly, no ceremony, in the way Marcus did things that mattered. Lily had her lessons every Wednesday and had begun, with Sophia's guidance, to add new elements to her own compositions, little architectures of sound that made Sophia shake her head slowly, sometimes in the manner of someone in the presence of something they cannot fully explain. On an October evening, with the California hills going gold outside the music room windows, Elena sat in her usual chair and watched Lily play. Marcus came and sat in the chair beside her. Not the doorway anymore, the chair, the one that had been there all along, and they watched together. Lily played her melody. The one she had made from nothing, from silence, from 3 months of mornings alone at a piano too big for her. She played it fully now, with 2 hands, with harmonies she had discovered and kept, with that 3-note signature at the end that had always been a period, a full stop, a declaration. She played the last note and let it ring out into the room. Then she turned around on the bench and looked at her mother and at Marcus with those dark, serious eyes that missed nothing, that had never missed anything, and she said in the solemn, certain voice of a child who has decided something, "Good." Elena laughed, the kind of laugh that is also the edge of tears. Marcus looked at Lily, and then at Elena, and then at the piano, and then back at Elena, and the something on his face was no longer the cousin of a smile. It was the whole thing. The real thing. Uncomplicated and certain, and there. The way music is there when someone who is always going to love it finally hears the right song. Outside, the roses were still in bloom. The fountains ran clear. And in the music room of a house that had once been only a symbol of what money could build, something was growing that money had nothing to do with. Something small and stubborn and extraordinary, like a child's hands finding music in a silence that had been waiting, all along, for exactly this. For every parent who carried their child through hard years toward something better, and every child who made that